6 months after the U.S. started a bombing campaign against ISIS, and with 3,000 troops already on the ground in Iraq, President Obama is finally poised to submit an authorization for the use of military force, or AUMF, to Congress for a vote. Today on Capitol Hill, the president's chief of staff and White House counsel briefed Senate Democrats on the broad strokes of the new AUMF, which, according to Illinois Senator Dick Durbin, will rule out what the White House calls enduring offensive ground operations, will automatically sunset after 3 years, and will replace the 2002 AUMF enabling the Iraq War. According to another report by Bloomberg's Josh Rogin, the bill would authorize military action against ISIS and its associated forces, and it would have no geographic limitations, leaving the administration free to expand the war to other countries. Legislation is expected to be delivered to Congress as early as tomorrow. I talked with Congressman Adam Schiff, Democrat from California, who told me his reaction to the administration's draft AUMF.
I think it's a good discussion draft. I think it has a good limitation of 3 years, which will place it beyond the presidential election and into the next presidency. Give the new president about a year to determine whether he needs a different kind of an authorization from. So the sunset date, I think, is appropriate. Where I think there are improvements that are going to have to be made is it still has a very broad provision in terms of the use of ground troops. And there's no sunset of the original 2001 AUMF. And without that sunset, Chris, a future president could simply say that when the new authorization terminates, that he'll rely on the old one, or she'll rely on the old one. So this is a real issue that I think is going to have to be addressed.
In fact, that is precisely the legal argument made by the White House right now. I mean, obviously, they are engaged in kinetic activity against ISIS. They are bombing. We have 3,000 or so armed U.S. personnel on the ground. They say they can do this under the 2001 AUMF. So why are we even debating this or talking about doing this at all if they already have the legal justification to do what they're doing?
Well, because I think the administration recognizes that's a pretty weak constitutional and legal argument. It's a very slender read. That old authorization that they're relying upon allows the president to use force against those who were responsible for 9/11, which they've interpreted as meaning al-Qaeda and its affiliates. Well, ISIL wasn't even in existence on 9/11. It's often been at war with al-Qaeda, so it plainly, I think, by its terms doesn't apply unless you use the most broad interpretation, which is what they're using. But it's all the more reason why that authorization should have the same sunset as any new authorization so that the next president can't simply fall back on this at some later point when the new resolution expires.
That key provision in the 2001 AUMF that you have proposed sort of rolling into this new one, sunsetting in 3 years in your own proposal, that key phrase is associated forces, right, which gives them the latitude to strike at a variety of targets, some of which didn't really even exist in 2001. We see that same language in the draft the White House has proposed here. Are you concerned that will provide the same kind of wide latitude to future administrations?
I am concerned about it, and of course all of these provisions are intertwined in a way, and that's why this is going to be the subject of a broad negotiation, and that is if you have a limit that, for example, prohibits the use of ground troops in a combat mission and it's narrowly drafted so it can't be interpreted in an overbroad fashion, that may give you some comfort in terms of other issues like the geographic limit or whether they'll use an expansive interpretation of associated forces. So the narrower the authorization in terms of one provision helps you potentially with other provisions. I would be less concerned about that associated forces language if, for example, we confine this to Iraq and Syria. If, on the other hand, there's no geographic limitation, then that term associated forces could become very significant if, for example, the president wants to go after Boko Haram. That's clearly not what's intended right now, but you could read that associated forces very broadly to include Libya, right, to include other parts of Africa as well.
Right now, there is no geographic restriction. It also seems to me that one of the issues that's going to come to the fore is that there's going to be some members of Congress, people like Lindsey Graham in the Senate, other Republicans, who are going to want this to be broader. I mean, how are you going to get to some kind of language that can get majorities in both houses?
Well, it is going to be a challenge, and a lot will depend on what kind of a coalition the administration really wants to build. If they want, they could build a coalition that consists of the Grahams and the McCains and is very Republican-oriented with a few Democrats. But I think they want something very broadly bipartisan that enjoys the support of a majority of members on both sides of the aisle. That will be a challenge, although I think it is a challenge that can be met. And I think what they put forward is a good starting point.
Not to be overly frank here, but Congress been rendered irrelevant in the era of the war on terror with the wide interpretation of the AUMF, with the administration already engaging in the kinds of activities they now seek legal authorization for? Isn't it a foregone conclusion you guys are going to vote to give them what they want?
Well, I hope it isn't. But yes, for the last 6 months, Congress has been AWOL. War has been going on. We haven't had a vote to declare it, to authorize it. We haven't even really had a debate in Congress over it. So you're absolutely right. Congress has been sidelined, but not by the administration. We have sidelined ourselves by insisting that the administration put forward its draft first. There was nothing in the Constitution that says we have the power to declare war only when we're asked by the president or only when we're asked nicely. So we have marginalized ourselves. This is an opportunity for Congress to reassert itself, to show that it is an equal branch and has a check and balance. So when it comes to making war, it was what I think the founders certainly envisioned. And I hope that we insist upon it and we make meaningful changes to this resolution.
All right, Congressman Adam Schiff, thank you very much.
Thanks, Chris.